1863, bringing his wife, Christiana, and 2 boys. They settled on a piece of land on what is now County Q and Town Line Road. Carl applied for citizenship in 1868, and it was granted in 1870. The log cabin they built was very small, 1 room with a loft for sleeping. It was later used as a horse barn. The part that was the original log cabin that they lived in is the part that shows with the planter hanging on the side. It was just that part of the house. The other parts were added on later. In 1995, my sister Bertz had the 2 barns separated. The cow barn was turned and made into a 2-car garage. She turned the house of the horse barn back into a late 1800s log cabin. The area from Town Line Road and north of Q, if you go from Town Line Road over to about Highway 42 and on Town Line Road over to just about the Bailey's Harbor line, and then would go east and make that kind of a block, that would be considered the German settlement. There were a few Swedish and Norwegian people and settlers, but mostly they were German settlers in this area. This is a picture that was taken in Richard Staver's home. I think this was his house, and many of the German settlers are there. There's Stavers and my dad and Otto Seiler and Mary Seiler, I think, is in there too. But the girls with the caps with the Red Cross, it must have been taken during the First World War, because I can't understand, I wouldn't know of any other reason why they would be dressed like that. Carl and Christiana had 2 more children. Sadly, Christiana died shortly after Herman was born. With 4 small children and a farm to care for, Carl quickly, and I mean quickly, found Wilhelmina Bentz, who actually just lived down the road on Q, not on Q, on Town Line Road, where she lived. And he married her. They then had 10 children, 8 surviving to adulthood. And my dad, John, was the 9th child. Carl built this house, and in 1886, the year my dad was born, the kitchen was added on. The first part, the larger part, was what he built originally, and then the lower part of the houses was all kitchen, and that was built then in 1868. Carl died in 1894. Dad was very young, about 10 years of age. He quit school. He'd been going to school, the Manassas School over on German Road and Highway 57. There was a little German school there, and that's also where they had a church in the same building. He quit school to help his mother run the farm. In 1913, my dad, who was still a bachelor, bought the farm from his mother. I'm just going to go on. I don't have that contract thing. The time period I will be talking about is the 1930s and 40s, as I remember life on a farm. I was the youngest of 6 children, and I probably remember more of the fun things than more of the work things that were done. Being the youngest, I didn't have as much work to do. Most farms operated about the same, usually 40 to 80 acres of land. They raised enough food for grain to sustain their families. We had cows, chickens, pigs, horses, and sheep. Dad owned 80 acres of land, and except for a small wooded area, It was all worked as farmland. He also rented the field from Hans Nelson for a pasture land for the cows. He raised corn, wheat, rye, oats, and barley, and also peas. And they were very hard peas. And I remember my brother Austin, my mother would just be furious with him because he always had his pockets full of hard peas. And he would chew them because, of course, he couldn't smoke around the barns at all. So he chewed peas, these hard peas. He had the most beautiful teeth I've ever seen. When he died at 85, he had one filling in his mouth. And I just think, it didn't happen to me, but I didn't chew peas either. We never had cherry trees on our farm, but many of the neighbors did have an orchard. We did, however, have a few pear trees. Since there was not a tractor, horses were used on the farm, and it was important to have a good team. My dad loved horses, as did my brother Austin, and he collected everything and anything related to horses in later years. He just had a marvelous collection of all the horse bells and everything imaginable for horses. But he really loved horses. This is a picture of my dad, and Bernice will remember this because Mr. DeMuth took this picture. Mr. DeMuth was a man that lived on German Road, wasn't it? Where Cordons lived, and now, I think somewhere in there. And he loved to take photographs and pictures, and I remember him coming up and making an appointment with Dad. He wanted to take a picture of him, and of course Dad thought he should get all dressed up for the picture, and he wouldn't have any of that. He said, no, I want you just in your farm clothes, just the way you are. So that's why this picture. Life on the farm was hard work for everyone. There was no running water, no electricity, no central heat, no indoor plumbing. Dad told of walking to Ephraim and filling 2 buckets of water from the bay, then carrying it home on his shoulders with a yoke and carrying the water home up the hill. That would have been probably 1.5 miles to 2 miles that he would walk with that. And then later they did drill a well, and as I was growing up, we always had a windmill. So we had a little easier time of getting water. Spring, summer, and fall were the busiest times for farmers. In spring, several days were spent picking stones. Anyone who lives in North County and has been on a farm knows about picking stones. You pick the stones from the field before planting. Stones were picked up and put on a stone boat. And a stone boat was something like a wagon, except that it had no wheels or sides to it. It was just flat on the ground, and the horses would pull it along, and that was so that you could roll the big stones right onto the stone boat, and you didn't have to pick them up. So it made it a little easier to do it that way. And then you would take the stones to the stone fence line and unload them. Every farm in Door County had or has a stone fence line on their property, I'm sure. Somewhere along the line there's a stone fence if you go looking for it. Once the fields were ready, it was time to plant. All the grain was seeded, and that was done with a machine, fortunately. The corn planted, and that was done by hand with a corn planter that you stuck in the ground, pulled it open, closed it, stepped, opened it, closed it, and that's the way you planted the corn in the hills in the field. And several acres of that, it got to be kind of tiresome, I'm sure. Of course, potatoes were planted, every household's staple food. Potatoes were planted by hand. One person would dig a row of holes, and one of us kids would go behind and drop in a potato, making sure the eyes were down, because that would be the right way to plant them. Then cover them up, and in the fall, each hill was dug up by hand, pick the potatoes off the vine, put the potatoes in a crate to be hauled to the root cellar for winter use and winter storage. The next big job was hay. That's my sister Addie, the corn. The other picture was my brother Butch and my sister Alberta. I think Eleanor was in the background too somewhere. As I said, the next big job was hay. First it was cut, then raked into windrows and left to dry. Usually the rows were forked over to dry completely. Many a hay barn burned because hay was put in the barn when it was still damp. And when I was writing this and reading it over this morning, and there was on the news that big barn fire down in Southern Door, and I thought to myself, I wonder if they had just put hay in that barn. Who knows, you know. The hay was put in the mows. Sorry about that. Fire was every farmer's worst nightmare. And I can remember my dad, whenever it stormed, and I think I was married many years before I really was even comfortable when there was an electric storm. They just scared me to death, because my dad would make all of us get up, no matter what time of the night. If it was storming, you got up, and he would pace the floor and look out and watch, see if all the barns were okay. So, you know, we kids, we'd sit there and, oh, do we have to be here, you know? Oh yes, we had to be up and ready and dressed in case anything happened. Once the hay was dry, it was loaded onto a wagon, which was driven onto the hay barn floor. A large fork, which worked on a pulley system, grabbed a big forkful of hay. The horses were hitched to the pulley system, and as they moved forward, the forkful of hay was carried into the haymow, where it was then dropped. The smell of new mown hay was really very sweet. And the haymow was a great place to play for a kid, and it was also a great place for the Easter Bunny to hide a basket. And my basket was oftentimes hidden there. Sometime near the end of July or the first part of August, the grain was ready to be harvested. Oh, those beautiful golden shocks and those gorgeous golden fields. And soon it was threshing time. Threshing was very hard work for everyone, but an exciting time for kids. I so loved the sound of that big old steam engine rumbling down the road and through the lane to come down and set up for threshing time at our house. Once the grain was cut, it was raked into rows, then hand-tied into bundles, which were set up in a teepee style, and they were called shocks. This was done to dry the grain. And I want to show you a painting that was done of our farm, and this painting was done by Reverend Westfall, who was the minister here at the Ephraim Church. And as far as I can determine, this was painted in probably 1946 or 1947. Hold it up, I don't know. Can you hold it up? No, I got it. But it's quite a nice painting that he did. And that's our farm. And you can see big barn, that the hay barn, which I can show you, which was this barn over here, that was taken down in 1953, 2 days before my college graduation. We had a tornado, and it went right past between the house and these sheds here, went down and hit that big log hay barn and just splintered it. We would find pieces of straw like nailed into the logs. It was a big log building, but it totally destroyed it. Didn't destroy anything else, didn't do a thing to the house or anything, but then it skipped off and went down through the woods. And that was our tornado. But we spent a whole summer cleaning that up. The neighbors in the area formed a company and bought a threshing machine. There was Richard Staver, you probably know Marvin, Richard Staver's father, Albert Smith, who lived over where it used to be called the Windmill, kind of gift shop over on Town Line Road. Well, that was Albert Smith, Eric Miller, Oscar Smith, Herman Staver, and my dad were the owners. They went from one farm to the next, always helping each other. It might be 1 or 2 days, sometimes 3 at each farm. Uncle Oscar was in charge of the steam engine, and when he blew that whistle, you better be ready and get to work, because he wasn't going to waste any time. As many as 15 to 18 men were needed to get the work done. You had to have drivers out in the field, loading up the hay, maybe as many as 3, so that would be 3 drivers, and then you had several men out there pitching the hay onto the wagon. Then you had people that had to pitch it off the wagon into the threshing machine. And of course the young guys, like my brother Austin, and brothers Austin and Butch, Marvin and Wes Staver, Harry Miller, and Cy Seiler, were the grain carriers. Now a gunny sack was held under a chute on the threshing machine, and it was filled with grain. They would grab it, hoist it up on their shoulder, carry it up the granary steps, and they were no small feat. I mean, they went straight up. Put it up in the granary, dump it, come back down, and fill up another bag, and make the trip again. And they would do that for days. So you can imagine they'd be pretty tired by the end of it. Each of the bags weighed at least 50 pounds, probably more, some if the grain was really heavy and good. The straw was blown into stacks near the barn and was used for bedding for the animals. The guys would be so dirty and tired that after chores and milking, they oftentimes came down to the bay here in Ephraim and went skinny dipping. I hope it was dark. In September, now this is, the one on the left is Richard Staver. Then it's my dad, Albert Smith, Uncle Oscar, and I think that's my brother Austin, and then this is Harry Miller on the right. But that's the old steam engine. Wonderful, wonderful old piece of machinery. In September, the corn was ready. Now it's time for silo filling. First, the corn that you had to, they're up there on the top of it. But first of all, you had to go into the field and break off all the cobs of corn. That was done by hand. And then you pick the corn from the stalks. And the cobs of corn were hauled to the hay barn floor to await the corn husking bee. That fun time. The corn was then cut and put into bundles. The same steam engine was used for silo filling as for threshing. The stalks were chopped up fine and blown into the silo, which was used for feed for the animals in the winter. Not as many men were needed for this job, but you can see all the same men up there, and they would have to kind of tromp it and keep it level. And silos were kind of a dangerous place to be. And my dad would never allow us kids to play in the silo because there was always the chance of it falling in on you and you would perish, really. And so that was not a safe place for us to be. Corn husking bees were held in the evenings. This was as much a social event as work to be done. Lanterns were hung in the barn for light. Lots of talk and many stories told. The young man who found a really bright red cob of corn was allowed to kiss the young woman sitting closest to him. And there were some men that cheated by bringing red ears of corn into the pocket. And not all girls really enjoyed being kissed either. They weren't too happy about it. The husked corn was stored in the corn crib, which was a rather small building made up of slats with about this much space between each slat, and that was so that air would blow through and keep the corn from getting moldy. The best part of husking bees was after all the corn was husked, a lunch was served, and if it wasn't too late, a little dancing. The fall also meant time to butcher. Probably a couple of pigs, a calf for veal, or a yearling for beef. Sausage was made. There was liver sausage, there was blood sausage, regular beef sausage, maybe some head cheese. The blood sausage, not so much either. My mother made something called rullepults. Rullepults is a combination of pork, beef, and veal that was rolled together with different kinds of spices and then stored in a salt brine in the cellar. After it was in the wintertime, after it had been in the brine for quite maybe a couple of months, it was ready. And then she'd bake it. And oftentimes for Sunday night supper, it was so good. I think about that so often. And I don't have the recipe, and I have never been able to figure it out to make it. But it sounds like it would be fun to do. Hams and bacon were taken to Uncle Oscar's to be smoked. He had a smokehouse, and he would smoke the hams and the bacon for us. The rest of the meat was either canned, but most often it was stored in a salt brine in large crocks in the cellar. Lots of fried pork that we ate in the wintertime. You'd think we would all have been gigantic salt pork and potatoes that we ate. Not so small anyway. The cellar had been dug out probably by hand when the house was built. It was just hard-packed earth, a very dark, cool place that was perfect for storage and storing food. The summer months were the busiest time. Beside all the field work, there was always the day-to-day chores to do. Milk the cows twice a day, clean the barns, feed the pigs and chickens, plus keeping up a large vegetable garden. On windless days, when the squeaky old windmill didn't turn, it was necessary to pump the water by hand. The water tank for the cows and the large tank overhead in the cow barn needed to be kept filled for the animals. This was a task that even a very young kid could do, and oftentimes I did have to do that. One would think winter would be a little easier, but this was the time to go down to the North Bay woods and cut firewood, both for our own use, but also extra to sell for some cash. This picture shows some of the cordwood Dad sold, plus lots of fence posts. And this is my brother Austin and Dad chopping some of the wood that we had. And I think, is it the next picture? Yeah, this shows the wood that they cut one winter and all the fence posts on the right, or on the left. That was a lot of wood. And I can still see my brother hitching up the team and going down to North Bay. And they'd go down for a day, they'd stay in the woods all day, and you'd worry about them, you know, whether they were all right and safe and everything else, and it'd be cold, miserable. But he had the most wonderful coat, and I've often wondered whatever happened to it. It was made of bearskin. It was full-length coat, and I just loved that bearskin coat. But that's what he would wear to keep warm while he was driving down to North Bay. That was always fun.
Eunice?
Yes.
Is that your house up there?
Yeah. Let's see. This is some, as I said, some of the cordwood and fence posts. It was always good to make a little extra money. We sold cans of milk to a condensery, as did the other farmers. The condensery our truck would come around in the morning, pick up the cans of milk. You'd have to take it down to the end of the drive, and then they would pick it up. And this was the basic income for most farmers. Eggs were traded for groceries at Uncle Arnold's own store here in Ephraim. And there were a couple of people who also bought whole milk from us, and they would come to the house and get their whole milk. And I certainly remember Art Garsky. I don't know if anyone else, maybe Bernice remembers him, came up to the farm to get milk. And I remember especially a Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941. Oh, how that man ranted and raved about the U.S. going into the war. I mean, he had us all just scared, silly. I mean, I was a little kid, and I was just frantic. I thought surely, you know, we were going to be bombed within a matter of seconds the way he was talking. And that's just the kind of guy he was. He was really scary. My folks spoke German to each other. They never taught any of us German, which was a disappointment to me. I would like to have learned, but being the times that it was in the war, you didn't speak German because that wasn't, you didn't want to be known as a German, so you didn't use the German language. So I never did learn. My dad was so happy when our daughter finally took German in school and she could talk to him a little bit. He loved that. Whenever farming is mentioned, watching the time, one thinks of the men and all the work that they had to do. But we can't forget the women who worked just as hard. Remember those 15 to 18 men I talked about that were at the farm for threshing? Well, they all had to be fed while they were working. And not just one meal. Oh no. First you had your own family for breakfast. Then at 10 o'clock, the men were fed a lunch. Now lunch consisted of homemade bread, cheese, sliced whole beef, pickles, canned fruit, cake, and coffee. Then a complete dinner at 12 o'clock noon, which meant meat, potatoes, vegetables, breads, pickles, dessert, the works. And you had to have that ready. My mother and Mom was known for her lemon meringue pie. She made unbelievably good lemon meringue pie. And that's what she would make for the threshing. Always. They always had lemon meringue pie at our house. Each lady kind of had their own specialty that they and the other one didn't step on her toes and make it. They knew better. Then there was another lunch served at 3 o'clock. Basically the same thing as you had in the morning. And then, of course, you had supper for your own family that you had to get. Remember, now there was no running water, so you carried it in, heated on the stove, and of course, then you had to carry out the wastewater. So you had all this to do, and you had to wash all those dishes, and do this all in a dish pan, no dishwasher, of course. So there was a lot of work for the women to do. Mom always felt she was lucky because she had 4 girls to help her. But even at 6 or 7 years of age, you were expected to help. You could at least dry dishes, and you could run and do errands. And so that was usually my job. I think I skipped a few, excuse me. I can't see. Yes. The women were responsible for preserving the food in the fall. The cellar shelves were filled, and they were full by fall, believe me. There was peaches, pears, cherries, raspberries, pickles of all different kinds, jams and jellies. There'd be probably several hundred cans of preserved fruit and vegetables in the cellar to last for the winter. And I just brought along, I mean, this is one that I've done, but you can imagine doing several hundred cans of fruit and vegetables that they would have to can. But that's the way you survived, that's all you had, so you were happy to have it in the wintertime especially. After butchering, it was time to make soap. They made all their own soap. At least once a week, you needed to churn butter. And of course, always the home-baked bread. We also gathered beech nuts, butternuts, and black walnuts to use in the winter. Monday was wash day, and it was a day's work. First, again, haul in the water, heat it in the copper boiler on the wood stove, and it's hot, like it has been, and you can imagine you've got to have the wood stove going. So it's warm. Then wash in that old temperamental gas engine of a washing machine that we had. Put it through a hand wringer, then through 2 rinse waters, and again through the hand wringer each piece, and had to be very careful so you didn't have it too tight so you break buttons, and had to do that carefully. Then it would be hung on the clothesline to dry. Winter or summer, it didn't matter. It was hung outside. Whether it was freezing cold, you still hung it outside, and you bring it in, and it was just as wet as when you hung it out there. But then you'd hang it all over the house, and so the men's underwear stood up in the corner, you know, because it was frozen. It was fun. It really was quite a chore. Finally, you'd have to carry out all the wash water. We could see across the field from our house, and we could see Ella Knudsen. Now, Ella and Edward lived just across the hill. They are, you probably know, some of you know, Joyce Knudsen Girdman. That would have been her grandparents. They lived just across the hill. And I can hear Mom saying, "Oh my, she has her wash out already." You know, then you got all nervous because somebody else had their wash out first. Women were judged on their housekeeping skills by how white their wash was. And there were lots of little stories, you know, if that wash wasn't really, really white. Tuesday was ironing day. Now, all that nice dry clothes that you worked so hard to get dry, you sprinkled it, rolled it up, put it in a basket, and then you had to iron it. And that was an all-day thing, because you had to heat the irons on the stove, on the cook stove again, you'd have that cook stove going, and you'd have 3 or 4 irons that you would be heating, and then you hook your handle onto it and iron a little bit. It would last about 10 minutes, and then you'd have to get a hot iron again. And I just think back and, oh my goodness, that was a long process. I learned to iron by doing the hankies and the pillowcases. That was my job. I still like to iron, but believe it or not, I really enjoy ironing. To this day, I enjoy ironing. Don't know why. Wednesday was finish ironing if need be, and then mend any clothes that needed to be mended. Nothing was thrown away. If it could be mended and you could get some more use out of it, you mended it. And there were always socks to darn. With 6 kids in the house, you can imagine how many socks my mother darned. And she taught us all how to. I used to darn all Ray's socks when we were first married. I never threw out a sock that had a hole in it. You know, you meant nowadays, throw them out if they have a hole in it. Not then. Thursday was a time to churn butter. And of course that was quite an event to churn the butter and then work it in the big wooden tub and work some salt into it, and then you'd store it in the cellar. Friday was cleaning day. The house was cleaned from top to bottom. Scrub that big kitchen floor on your hands and knees until it was almost white. It was a hardwood floor, and it was scrubbed so many times that it was literally white. Saturday was baking day. Oh, yum. The delicious schnecken that my mother made. Schnecken is a cinnamon and raisin bun, and my mom could bake. Ooh, she could bake. And I don't know where she learned, but evidently from her mother, she really was a very good baker. Sunday meant Sunday school and church. And other than the normal daily chores, it was truly a day of rest. And everybody did rest. I mean, you just did not do anything that wasn't necessary, because that was your day of rest. Everything I've talked about seems like it was just work, and more work. But there were many fun times too. Neighbors were important. They would often drop by for an evening visit. No special invitations were ever extended. You knew you would be welcome, no matter when you dropped in. Dad grew his own popcorn, so a snack when company came was usually popcorn and a bowl of apples. And Dad also made wonderful popcorn balls. He would always make the syrupy stuff put on the popcorn balls, and it was good. And he made a delicious taffy that we would pull. My mother never made that, but Dad would always do that. Life was very simple and not a lot of complications, you know. It was just very different from today. Dad was from a large family, and many of his sisters and brothers lived close by. So Sunday afternoon was usually a good time for a visit. Since ours was, quote, the home place, most came to our house. Lots of Sunday night suppers together. School and church were important. The women had ladies' aid meetings, which was an all-afternoon event. There were school programs and events at the Liberty Grove School that everyone would attend. Women kept busy with knitting, crocheting, embroidery, quilting. They always seemed to have something in their hands to do. And I just wanted to show you a few things. This is a crocheted piece that my mother made for me for my dollhouse little dresser that I had. And I treasure that. And, you know, things like this that they would make. And then they would embroider. And now, I mean, who burger. This was just one of those towels from the feed sacks. But look at the work they put into it. Pillowcases and sheets with all this work, and of course these all had to be washed and ironed. I kept them because my mother made them and I treasured them, but believe me, I'm not using them. I remember too many Saturday night dances in our kitchen. Tables and chairs were pushed to the wall, a keg of beer in the corner, and everyone brought some food, which was served around midnight. Elmer and Josephine Lang, Bernice's parents, would play, Elmer playing the fiddle and Josephine the accordion. A little cornmeal sprinkled on the floor, making it nice and slippery for easy dancing. Often 2 sets of square dancers could dance in our kitchen. Since ours was the largest room, most dances were held at our house. I have just a small thing that I want to tribute to women. Just wait a minute. Take a minute. This was from the younger days. I was a little skinnier. Lot skinnier The principal use of Grandma's apron was to protect the dress underneath. And usually the women wore 2 aprons. They would wear the big apron like something like this, even bigger. But then they wore a fancy one, half apron underneath. And that was so when the minister came, he'd whip off the apron, and so you were clean. Because she only had a few, it was easier to wash aprons than dresses, and they used less material. But along with that, it served as a pot holder for removing hot pans from the oven. It was wonderful for drying children's tears, and on occasion was even used for cleaning out dirty ears. From the chicken coop, the apron was used for carrying eggs, fussy chicks, and sometimes half-hatched eggs to be finished in the warming oven. When company came, those aprons were ideal hiding place for shy kids. And when the weather was cold, Grandma wrapped it around her arms to keep warm. These big old aprons wiped many a perspiring brow bent over the hot wood stove. Chips and kindling wood were brought into the kitchen in that apron. From the garden, it carried all sorts of vegetables. After the peas had been shelled, it carried out the hulls. In the fall, the apron was used to bring the apples that had fallen from the trees. When unexpected company drove up the road, it was surprising how much furniture that old apron could dust in a minute. When dinner was ready, Grandma walked out onto the porch, waved her apron, and the men knew it was time to come in for dinner. It'll be a long time before someone invents something that will replace that old-time apron that served so many purposes. I hope this gives you a little glimpse of what life was like on a farm in the German settlement. I did forget to tell you one thing, and that is, at the beginning I was going to do this. This is a high chair that was brought from Germany by my grandfather, Carl, and it was made in Germany. It was carved with a butcher knife, and it has been in the family ever since. My dad, all 13 kids sat in it. We sat in it, all of the kids in my family, our family. My my kids sat in it just to have their picture taken, because it's really not too safe, you know, you were tied in with this one, not too safe, but anyway, a new seat had to be put in it. But my dad always told about when he was older, they took off one arm, one side, and you could see where it has been taken off. And that's because he said, my seat was too big, so I sat, you know, crossways. And you can see how the things are worn down because they sat that way in the chair. I just love this old high chair. This is a real treasure for me. So, anyone have any questions or comments? Why? That's it. Yes?
Did any of the agreement farms supply the chickens for the hotels in Ephraim?
Sorry, I didn't.
Supply the chickens for every Sunday for the hotels in Ephraim. Did any of the farms do that?
Some farmers did, yes. I remember at Ida Navarro's own store, they bought their chickens somewhere else.
Oh.
I don't remember where they got them.
Give them food or sell food to them in any way?
Not usually, not usually. Yeah, not too much that I remember anyway. But I do remember them butchering chickens. Oh, would Ida ever take care of those chickens? And she was done with it. Stay out of her way, would you? But oh, she was a love. You know what she would give me? My dad and mom would go down to the store on Friday nights or Saturday night to help with the butchering of chickens because they'd have so many that they needed to deliver for Sunday dinner. And so they'd go down and help them clean the chickens. And I was used to homemade bread. I mean, that's all I ever had. And to me, that, you know, button bread was really a treat. And I would give me a piece of button bread. And it was so soft and so wonderful. She slathered it with peanut butter. And that was the biggest treat for me in the whole wide world. So, but anyway.
That store-bought bread your dad called clunchy?
He called it Fuji.
Oh,
If you didn't like it.
I used to call it street bread.
What kind of?
Flattened bread.
Street bread. Street?
Street because of the, you know, it wasn't cut.
Yeah, it was
It was just.
very, very straight. Yeah. Yes.
Your mother's.
My mother was Clara Miller, and she was not from around here. That's a whole story on itself. Because my dad, as I said, was a bachelor, and he was getting up in years. I mean, he was 32 when he finally got married, and that was old for that time, you know. But not Roy. Jack Knudsen, who was a chiropractor here in Ephraim, and he lived across the hill, across the road from us. And he was going around to Stanley and in that area of Wisconsin, and he came home and he talked to my dad, Johnny, you've got to meet this woman, because they thought he should be married by now, you know. And so finally my dad did go down to Stanley and met my mother, and they were married within a week. Fast work.
How did he get down there, do you know?
I imagine with Jack.
No,
Well, they had,
a car or horse and buggy?
oh, they had cars by that time, they were cars, not very reliable. Probably changed the tire about 10 times before they got here, but they did have a car. Yes.
Is it another big story on how you met this character right here?
Well, that character I met in California. Yeah, and I dragged him back here. Yeah. I went out to California to teach after college, and
Long Beach, California.
that was the time, I think my dad thought he would never see me again when I went, because that was in 1953, and I don't think he expected to see me again. And I went out to California and taught there for 4 years. Met Ray, and we were married out there. And
And a church.
Yes.
Why was, Dan, from wet hay more of a fire hazard than his rock?
It was, almost ferment.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And I remember my dad putting lots of salt on the hay. And I don't know whether that was to dry it more, but I can still remember him up in the hay mound, spreading salt on the hay. Not sure why that was.
Gives moisture.
Cows to eat it better.
Okay. Well, thank you all, and I certainly appreciate it. And I know that in the paper it said something about the schools, but that's another whole story. The school life, isn't it? Bernice and I would have some good stories to tell. Yeah, my brother would drive us in the wintertime when it was so cold and we'd have to walk, but he'd hitch up the team and we had a big wagon and he'd have all the blankets in there and the straw and he'd take us to school with the horses and with the bells. He always had bells on the horses, so yeah, that was fun.
Now you can see why I married her.
Yes.
Does your family farm still stand today?
It's still there. My sister was living on it, but first my grandfather, of course, he built it. And my dad bought it, and he was on there his entire life. And then when my dad died, my sister Bertz was home, basically taking care of him and helping. She wasn't married at the time, and so all the rest of the kids were. So we said, okay, the farm is yours. So she stayed on the farm until she passed away in '95. And then, we wanted to keep it, I wanted to keep it, but we already had a house and all of us had our own places, and so it just seemed better to let it go, so we did sell it. But the buildings are all still standing. I understand they've been changed a lot. They've done a lot of remodeling and changing of it, which is, fine, it's their home. So, but I have my memories of the way it was. Yeah, Linda too. Linda's a relative too. Yeah, all related, all related.
Yes, thank you so much.
Very much.